Greetings from one of the most unsettling cases in Virginia history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. The locations and times of day or night that these recorded accounts reach are of interest to us. October 1911 fell on the University of Virginia Medical Campus, and the air in Charlottesville was heavy with the moisture of autumn. With its state-of-the-art morgue facilities regarded as some of the best in the American South, the recently built McIntyre Building shone boldly among the Jeffersonian architecture. For decades, what transpired behind those walls would be hidden in university archives, spoken of only in whispers by the senior academics who said they could still smell the after-midnight odor of formaldehyde in some hallways. A straightforward ledger error on the 17th of October 1911 was the first. The head of the anatomy department, Dr. William Thornton, discovered a discrepancy in the inventory of cadavers. 7 bodies, indigent patients whose remains remained unclaimed, had been brought from the Western State Hospital in Staunton that month, according to county records. However, there were only 6 recorded entries in the morgue ledger. Such accounting errors were uncommon in those days, when cadaver shortages plagued medical schools across America, especially at a school as thorough as the University of Virginia. If not for Department Secretary Eleanor Blackwood, who maintained that her records were perfect, the issue would have been written off as a clerical error. She allegedly assured him, "I've recorded every body that's come through those doors, Dr. Thornton," according to subsequent testimony. If there's one missing from the ledger, it means it never officially arrived. Thornton was forced to look into the matter further by the young secretary's eagerness, unintentionally tugging at a thread that would reveal a web of unsettling incidents that had occurred months before. According to an examination of the delivery records, the 7th body belonged to a guy who was only known as Patient 49, a middle-aged, impoverished man who had been brought to Western State Hospital in early 1911 due to melancholy and delusions. Just a number, no name, no background, no relatives. As per the standard agreement between the institutions, Patient 49's body was sent to the university after he passed away from pneumonia 6 months after being institutionalized, according to hospital documents. However, this specific cadaver had disappeared in some way between delivery and documentation. A hospital probe might have been pursued by Dr. Thornton, but academic demands got in the way. With first-year medical students starting their anatomy coursework, the fall semester was well underway. Thornton would later refer to this choice as the greatest professional regret of my career in a 1919 private letter to the university president, which temporarily put the mystery surrounding the missing body on hold. Decades later, when the administrative building was being renovated, this letter was found. Edwin Merritt, a quiet, industrious young man from Richmond whose academic records demonstrated extraordinary promise, was one of those first-year students. He was 22. Merritt, a well-known banker's son, had gotten into the university via a combination of family ties and academic ability, which was common at the time. His unique preoccupation with neuroanatomy was what his classmates later described as peculiar. Merritt showed an eerie excitement that his lab partners found uncomfortable, whereas most students approached their first dissection with a mix of natural aversion and scientific curiosity. He handled the instruments with a precision that suggested prior experience. Merritt's lab partner Thomas Holloway wrote in a personal journal found among his belongings following his death in 1967. When our assigned cadaver was unveiled, an elderly woman who had died of heart failure, Merritt appeared almost disappointed. He kept glancing at the neighboring table where they were working on a male subject with an unusual cranial structure. The first few weeks of the anatomy course went smoothly. Under the guidance of Dr. Thornton and his helpers, students dissected cadavers methodically while working in groups of 4. The laboratory sessions were held in the McIntyre Building's basement, a large, dim space with high windows that let in very little natural light. By late afternoon, the dissection tables were covered in harsh shadows from electric lights, which made the mood uncomfortable to many students. Edwin Merritt never missed a session, according to attendance records, and frequently stayed late to finish intricate sketches of anatomical components. Early November was the first sign that something was wrong. Dr. Thornton was informed by Samuel Preston, the morgue attendant, that someone had been using the morgue outside of regular business hours. It said, "Items have been moved. in his report. Instruments rearranged, cadaver sheets disturbed. Nothing missing that I can determine, but someone has definitely been here. Preston, a Civil War veteran known for his meticulousness, claimed that before shutting up each night, he always left the preparation room in the exact same arrangement. When Preston submitted a logbook demonstrating that more formaldehyde had been used than could be explained by the standard coursework doctor, Thornton agreed to look into Preston's worries after initially dismissing them as the whims of an elderly man. There were only 3 sets of morgue keys, one owned by Preston, one by Dr. Thornton, and a master set stored in the administration office for emergencies, and they were tightly regulated. Nothing was wrong when the master keys were checked. Preston vowed that he never lost his keys. When Preston arrived on November 12th, he discovered one of the storage cabinets unsecured, but nothing seemed to be broken or missing, which added to the mystery. Concerned, Dr. Thornton ordered new locks to be installed and limited access to authorized workers only. Around this time, Edwin Merritt's actions started to draw notice. Merritt often returned to their shared quarters well after midnight, his clothes reeking of the distinct smell of formaldehyde and other chemicals, according to James Wilson, his roommate at the university dormitory. More concerning were the changes in Merritt's look and mannerisms. Wilson later testified before the university disciplinary committee that when asked where he was, Merritt would say he was studying in the library, though I knew the library closed at 10 sharp. He had formerly been well-groomed, but now he looked unkempt, with black circles beneath his bloodshot eyes. His previously stellar academic record started to deteriorate in every subject but anatomy, where he still performed exceptionally well. Numerous instructors saw his propensity to nod off during class, scrawling furiously in a leather-bound notepad he carried with him at all times. When Thomas Holloway contacted Merritt in late November regarding a set of costly anatomical instruments that had vanished from his personal kit gifts from his father, a Roanoke surgeon, upon his admittance to medical school, the situation became heated. Merritt responded to the charge with unusual venom, according to Holloway's journal. According to Holloway, his face transformed entirely. The scholarly mask dropped away, revealing something feral underneath. He denied taking my instruments with such vehemence that I feared he might strike me. Then, just as suddenly, the mask returned, and he apologized for his outburst, attributing it to exhaustion from his studies. When Holloway returned his instruments to his kit the next day, they had been meticulously cleaned. His lab companion simply nodded and went back to work, dissecting their cadaver's peripheral nervous system with unusual vigor when he brought this up to Merritt. Merritt appeared to be especially interested in the cranial nerves, according to Holloway, who spent hours sketching their paths with a delicateness that verged on reverence. Winter's long nights and short days arrived in Charlottesville as November turned into December. The mood in the anatomy lab, which was never happy, became much more gloomy. Few students were willing to stay in the basement room any longer than absolutely required, so they rushed to finish their work before nightfall. With the exception of Edwin Merritt, who appeared more comfortable among the dead. During one of these late sessions, Dr. Thornton chose to check on the anatomy laboratory before leaving his office to go home. His private journal, which was later discovered among his files following his death in 1926, would document what he found. I observed Mr. Merritt alone in the laboratory, which in itself violated protocol requiring students to work in pairs at minimum, he stated. He was bent over a partial dissection that I did not recognize as being part of our current curriculum. When I entered, he hurriedly covered his work with a sheet. His explanation that he was conducting additional study seemed plausible, yet his manner was so agitated that I found myself deeply disturbed. As the young guy collected his supplies, Dr. Thornton gave the order for Merritt to finish his work and depart the building. According to Thornton's journal, what most disturbed him was not Merritt's unapproved presence, but rather the characteristics of the objects he saw on the dissection table. What seemed to be human brain structures, prepared and preserved in a way that was not consistent with conventional teaching practices. Thornton carried out a comprehensive inventory of the anatomy lab and adjacent morgue the next day. Preston confirmed that a number of preservation chemicals were used over their predicted limits, but he did not find any overt signs of improper behavior. Preston's observation that nothing was obviously missing but that the storage area holding the neuroanatomy specimens seemed to have been accessed was more concerning. Tensions in the medical school subsided a little as winter break drew near. Before leaving for the Christmas break, students concentrated on finishing their semester exams. Edwin Merritt received uncommon recognition from Dr. Thornton himself for his exceptional accomplishment on the written anatomy exam. Those who watched him, however, remarked that the young man appeared distracted and growing more and more apart from his colleagues, displaying no joy in his accomplishment. By December 20th, the majority of students had left campus to spend the holidays with their family back home. However, Edwin Merritt asked to be allowed to stay on school since he wanted to use the break for more study and because it was far from his family's house. Permission was given without question, and such requests were not unusual, especially from devoted pupils. The events of those peaceful days between Christmas and New Year's are still cobbled together from a variety of reports and post-event revelations. There is no doubt that, as was his practice even during university breaks, Samuel Preston showed up at the McIntyre Building on the 28th of December, 1911, to inspect the amenities. He quickly contacted Dr. Thornton, who was staying with relatives in neighboring Staunton, as well as university security, after discovering what he had. Preston found the anatomy lab in a condition of chaos unlike anything he had seen in his 20 years of service. According to the official report submitted to the university administration, and conspicuously missing from public records, a central workspace had been created by rearranging the dissection tables. A variety of specimens, mostly neurological in nature, had been taken out of storage and placed in what Preston called a methodical manner, indicating intentionality as opposed to vandalism. Despite the facility's formal closure, the most unsettling findings were the existence of new chemical compounds and proof of recent preservation efforts. When Dr. Thornton arrived in the early afternoon, the building had been secured by college security. He carefully examined the lab and found a number of concerning things. First, despite abundant proof that supplies had been utilized, there were no entries in the morgue's logbook. Second, the equipment storage lacked a number of specialist tools required in neurological dissection. Third, and perhaps most concerning, they found a makeshift workspace with what looked to be human neural tissue in various stages of preservation in a distant area of the lab, partially hidden beneath storage cabinets. According to Dr. Thornton's personal account, the precision of the work was undeniable. Whoever had done this possessed considerable anatomical knowledge and technical skill, yet the nature of the preparations, focusing exclusively on the brain and nervous system, suggested a purpose beyond mere academic study. Some specimens had been sectioned in patterns inconsistent with any recognized neuroanatomical approach. Edwin Merritt was conspicuously missing from the scene. His dorm room had been cleared out, and everything he owned had been packed up and taken out, with the exception of his textbooks, which were neatly placed on his desk. After returning early from vacation, his roommate said he hadn't seen Merritt since before Christmas. Dr. Thornton decided to perform a thorough assessment of the morgue's facilities, since he was extremely concerned about these occurrences. The most unsettling finding came during this inventory. Concealed beneath equipment stacks in a rarely utilized storage area, they discovered proof that the building had been occupied. Personal belongings, a little crib, and dozens of notebooks with intricate anatomical illustrations dotted with increasingly unintelligible text. The notes show a mind spiraling into obsession and are currently housed in the university's restricted archives. The meticulous notes on neuroanatomy in the early entries, which are most likely from September and October, are in line with the work of a committed medical student. However, the topic gets increasingly unsettling as the pages go by. In the final entries, dated late December, coherence had been replaced by frenzied speculation about transferring neural pathways and preserving consciousness beyond death, accompanied by detailed drawings of the human brain and rambling theories about seats of consciousness and neural architecture of the soul. References to Patient 49 and specific protocols that seemed to record unapproved trials were the most concerning. A passage that was frequently referred to in subsequent unofficial investigations read, "Patient 49's cerebral structure presents anomalies consistent with my hypothesis. The temporal lobe specimens respond differently to electrical stimulation. Preservation methods standard to the university prove inadequate. I have developed an alternative approach that maintains neuroplasticity for extended periods. The topic of Edwin Merritt's whereabouts became more pressing as Dr. Thornton and university administrators struggled with the ramifications of these findings. Carefully written to prevent alarm, a subtle inquiry was addressed to his family's Richmond home. The telegram response, sent on December 30th, only made the question more complicated. Edwin Merritt had not gone home, and his family had not anticipated that he would. His father's terse response was that Edwin had told them months before that he would be spending the holiday working with a professor on research. A completely made-up statement. The university was now in a difficult situation. According to the evidence, a first-year medical student had been using university facilities to carry out illegal and extremely unethical research, maybe including human remains. However, making such material public would harm the university's standing and possibly the medical program as a whole. The president of the institution was consulted, and it was decided to deal with the situation internally while discreetly looking for Edwin Merritt. There were no quick results from that search. Merritt had disappeared as thoroughly as the remains of patient 49. No ticket was bought in his name, according to train station records, and no new residents who fit his description were reported by nearby boarding homes. It seemed as though he had just left his old life behind, bringing whatever awful knowledge he had picked up from his nightly studies with him. The university acted quickly to keep things under control. The anatomy lab was completely cleaned, all abnormal specimens were appropriately recorded, and they were either preserved or disposed of in accordance with medical procedures. After being rewarded for his alertness and pledged to silence, Samuel Preston's cooperation was guaranteed with a sizable annuity upon his retirement. Dr. Thornton was assigned to examine and strengthen security protocols for the lab and mortuary. Students found the anatomy lab functioning regularly under improved supervision when they returned in January 1912. In order to avoid arousing suspicions, Edwin Merritt's departure was portrayed as a regrettable withdrawal brought on by family difficulties. An administrative order sealed his academic records. In 1912, the winter and spring terms went smoothly. After finishing their anatomy homework, the first-year medical students in the class moved on to the next stage of their education. Without an accidental discovery in April 1912, the events of December 1911 would have stayed entirely hidden. About 3 miles from the university grounds, a groundskeeper found an abandoned cabin while removing early spring vegetation among the Ragged Mountains just west of Charlottesville. According to local understanding, the building had been abandoned for a long time, but it had recently been occupied. Investigators discovered evidence linking the location to Edwin Merritt, including his name in abandoned medical publications, anatomical sketches that matched those in his notebooks, and most unsettling of all, specialized preservation tools that had vanished from the institution. Before local law enforcement could fully investigate, university officials discreetly secured the cabin. Their findings were recorded in a private report to the president of the institution, which was subsequently kept in the restricted archives. This study claims that there was indications of activities in the cabin that were consistent with unapproved anatomical research, including the use of chemicals for tissue preservation and specialist equipment for neurological work. The private notebooks discovered concealed under a floorboard were the most concerning. These papers, which were less coherent than those found in the medical facility, showed a mind filled with only one goal: using anatomy to preserve human consciousness. In his publications, Merritt cited historical authors such as Luigi Galvani and his research on animal electricity, but he took these ideas in an unsettling way by implying that adequate cerebral tissue stimulation and maintenance would enable 20pi, the continuation of thought patterns beyond death. On January 3, 1912, the last diary entry was as simple as it could be. The procedure is perfected. The preparations are complete. Tonight I join my subjects in the ultimate experiment. Under the direction of Dr. Thornton, university authorities searched the surrounding woodland areas thoroughly, out of concern that they could find Merritt's remains, or worse, proof that he had gotten more subjects for his research. Searchers found a number of glass jars with preserved specimens buried at different locations within the cabin, but no remains were located. After being discreetly gathered, These were brought back to the university for appropriate disposal. The leadership of the institution took steps to completely end the situation when Edwin Merritt went missing for weeks. Merritt had left the university in good standing because of unidentified health issues, according to updated official records. By administrative decree, his academic records were placed in restricted archives and sealed. The Ragged Mountains cabin was destroyed, and all traces were removed from the location. If it weren't for a string of strange events at Staunton's Western State Hospital in the summer of 1912, the affair could have been forgotten entirely. In the ward where patients with neurological conditions were housed, staff reported disturbances such as lights flickering without explanation, medical records discovered in disarray, and most concerning of all, a night attendant who said she saw a young man who looked like Edwin Merritt watching patients through a window. A hospital gown was reported missing from the storage space, but no intruders were detected when security was called. Dr. Thornton eventually learned about these reports from his hospital contacts. Thornton went to Staunton to do his own investigation because he was worried Merritt would still be in the region and possibly carry on with his unsettling activities. No employee or patient in the hospital's records fit Merritt's description. But while he was there, Thornton found something that had a direct bearing on what had happened the winter before. Thornton discovered odd notations in the file of Patient 49, the unnamed man whose body had supposedly been transported to the university, while looking through the hospital's dispatch records for cadavers sent to medical facilities. The patient was admitted with exceptional neurological presentations, including periods of increased cognitive function interspersed with total dissociative episodes, according to the medical records. More importantly, a visiting medical student from the University of Virginia had evidently taken special notice of patient 49 when he visited the clinic in September 1911 as part of an educational observation. Edwin Merritt was a student, according to the sign-in record. This link raised the unsettling possibility that Merritt had identified patient 49 during that visit, noticed a condition in the man that matched his developing obsessions, and somehow made arrangements to acquire the body after death, possibly by snooping around the university's regular transfer procedure. If this was the case, Merritt's tests had been considerably more planned and deliberate than had been thought. Only the university president was informed of these facts by Dr. Thornton, who suggested that future cadaver transfers incorporate several verification procedures and that security at university medical facilities be permanently improved. His suggestions were put into effect without informing the larger faculty. They merely became new administrative procedures. There were no more incidents throughout the summer of 1912. A new class of medical students started the school year with no prior knowledge of Edwin Merritt or the previous year's events. With the peculiar case essentially hidden beneath layers of official quiet, life at the University of Virginia resumed as usual. Officially, Edwin Merritt was never seen again. After months of silence, his family, who were well known in Richmond society, finally reported him missing to the police, but the investigation produced no findings. In response to questions, university representatives insisted that Merritt had resigned willingly and had made arrangements to pursue his education overseas, a fabrication designed to thwart any further investigation. Without a string of articles in the Southern Medical Journal from 1927 to 1929, the case might have remained entirely obscured from history. Composed by a doctor known only as a former student of Virginia, these pieces, which purported to be scholarly analyses of neuroanatomy, had specifics and theoretical stances that Dr. Thornton, who was still alive at the time, recognized as very similar to ideas in Merritt's notes. The articles put out bold theories that went well beyond the accepted science of the time regarding neural preservation and the potential persistence of electrical activity in poorly maintained brain tissue. There was no success in locating the author through the journal's editors. Via the time inquiry started, the author's only means of communication was a post office box in Baltimore, where the manuscripts had been sent in via mail. The writings themselves were controversial from an academic standpoint, but they only made theoretical claims that stretched the limits of modern neuroscience and contained nothing explicitly unethical to support judicial action. A strange incident happened at Western State Hospital in 1932 21 years after the happenings at the university. An elderly patient with senile dementia, who had been admitted abruptly, started speaking with extraordinary clarity, displaying an understanding of sophisticated medical concepts and making a specific desire to speak with Dr. Thornton of the University of Virginia. Given the patient's prior state, hospital staff thought this behavior was unusual and informed the university. Dr. Thornton consented to see the patient, even though he was by that point retired from active teaching, but still had ties to the university. Although the details of that conversation were never fully revealed, hospital records show that Thornton left the meeting clearly shaken and told staff to keep a careful eye on the patient and to report any changes in his condition right away. The patient abruptly passed away during the night 3 days later. Heart failure was listed as the cause because it is sufficiently prevalent in older individuals to not raise any red flags. But according to an on-duty nurse, the guy had been writing frantically on sheets of paper in his last hours, which were lost after his passing. Her account, which is documented in the hospital's records, states that the patient's final words were, "He found a way. God help us. He found a way." Upon learning of the death, Dr. Thornton asked that no autopsy be conducted, pointing to the patient's elderly age and obvious natural causes. This request was approved without hesitation because it came from a reputable doctor. The patient had no known family, and their remains was interred in the hospital cemetery beneath a monument with just a number. 2 weeks following this incident, Dr. Thornton unexpectedly passed away at his Charlottesville home. Although cerebral hemorrhage was listed as the official explanation, there were persistent whispers among his coworkers that he had committed suicide. Rumor was stoked by the alleged unusual request that his personal files, including journals pertaining to the Merritt event, be donated to the university archives with instructions that they be kept sealed for 50 years. Researchers discovered that the documents were lacking when they were eventually made available to them in 1982. There were no diaries from late 1932 that mentioned Thornton's encounter with the enigmatic patient at Western State Hospital. It has never been established whether they were taken out before, to, or following their submission to the archives. If the McIntyre building hadn't been renovated in 1967, Edwin Merritt's tale and his unsettling work would have been lost to history altogether. A sealed metal box embedded in the concrete was found by workers dismantling portions of the old morgue floor. It appears to have been placed there as a sort of time capsule during earlier 1925 repairs. A sealed package addressed to future colleagues, in what was later determined to be Dr. Thornton's handwriting, was among the historical records and photos of the medical school found within. This envelope's contents included a succinct description of the Merritt event that emphasized the value of ethical oversight in medical education while deliberately omitting the most upsetting facts. A picture of the first-year medical class from 1911 was attached, with one face likely Merritt's carefully wiped out. "Watch for him among you." Thornton had scrawled a mysterious message on the back of the picture. "Some knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. Some boundaries, once crossed, leave us forever changed." Access to these materials was limited by university administrators who were worried about possible scandal. They were essentially buried once more after being cataloged and added to the special collections, which are only accessible with special administrative authority. References to the sealed Thornton documents were discovered in a cross-index catalog in 1968 by a doctoral student studying the history of medical education in Virginia. His interest was stoked when his repeated requests to view these materials were turned down. His dissertation contained a brief mention of a troubling episode involving unapproved anatomical study, which he pieced together by continuous investigation of peripherally relevant documents. A Johns Hopkins University medical historian became interested in this reference and contacted the graduate student to inquire further. Their following cooperation resulted in a covert request for access to the sealed materials for valid historical research that was sent to the administration of the University of Virginia. The formal denial letter unintentionally disclosed the existence of the restricted materials, something the institution had previously avoided doing, even though the request was denied. Equipped with this validation, the researchers expanded their search and found former anatomy department employees who had started working there in the 1930 seconds and 1940 seconds. These now older people remembered vague tales about a gifted student who had gone too far in his anatomical studies that had been passed down through departmental mythology. As a young teacher, one retired professor recalled being cautioned not to let students handle the neuroanatomy specimens unattended. The most important discovery came from a surprising place. After discovering a notebook among her late father's belongings, the daughter of Samuel Preston, the morgue attendant who had found the proof of Merritt's activities, got in touch with the university in 1969. It seems that Preston had documented the events himself, using a secret shorthand that his daughter had to understand for years. New information regarding the case was revealed in this journal, including Preston's concerns that Merritt had been working without authorization for weeks prior to the Christmas holiday finding. What's most troubling is that Preston wrote in his diary that he thought Merritt had been using specimens that weren't all from approved university cadavers. Some of the tissue appears too fresh, he stated. Preston also documented seeing odd electrical equipment among Merritt's effects devices that appeared to be made to apply regulated current to preserve neural tissue. I fear the young man may have acquired additional subjects through means I dare not contemplate. The 1911 incident went unreported because of the link between the local authorities and the university administration. Preston's notebook states that the university president and the local police chief were cousins, which allowed them to agree to resolve the issue internally. The scandal would have devastated both town and gown, Preston wrote. An unsolved disappearance was deemed preferable to the truth. The medical historian who had been looking into the case wrote a well-written piece about past examples of unethical behavior in medical school that was published in a prestigious journal in 1969. A brief mention of an undocumented case at the University of Virginia involving possibly illegal neuroanatomical research was made in the article. The reference was obvious to people who were familiar with the Merritt case rumors, although being purposefully ambiguous to prevent legal consequences. In a formal letter to the journal editor, the university administration denied any past ethical transgressions and asked for a retraction. The letter and the historian's response were published by the magazine, which stated that his piece had not made any specific accusations, but had only mentioned undocumented events, a description that was still true because the institution had refused to make pertinent materials available. Although restricted to scholarly groups, this public discussion was the first time any part of the Merritt case had been mentioned in print. Other historians started looking for links and proof outside the university's restricted archives, which paved the way for more thorough investigation. The discovery of admission records for a patient in 1930, an unnamed guy who was discovered wandering in the Ragged Mountains west of Charlottesville by a researcher looking through Western State Hospital's archives in 1969, was one such connection. The medical evaluation revealed that the individual had odd neurological presentations, suffered from significant amnesia, and looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. Most significantly, despite lacking identification or a known history, the patient had extensive understanding of anatomy and medicine. Known only as John Doe Monroe, 37, this patient spent around 2 years at Western State. According to hospital records, he was calm and helpful, reading staff-provided medical texts for the most part. His health apparently declined quickly in 1932, as evidenced by medical records that detailed frequent seizures interspersed with unusually clear times during which the patient spoke as though endowed with hitherto unexhibited memories and knowledge. This case's circumstances and date were too similar to the Merritt mystery to be accidental. In accordance with the projected age in the hospital records, Edwin Merritt would have been around 41 years old if he had been admitted in 1930. The Ragged Mountains, where he was found, were the same region where Merritt's hut had been found in 1912. Above all, the patient's final decline and death in 1932 matched exactly the enigmatic patient who had asked to see Dr. Thornton just before the doctor's own demise. Even though they were circumstantial, these linkages raised the unsettling possibility that Edwin Merritt had lived for years after going missing, possibly carrying on with his job alone, only to return from the woods in a state of physical or mental decline. It was unknown what had transpired over the 18 years that had passed, and what information or circumstance had caused him to look for his former professor. The last piece of the jigsaw came to light in 1969, when a secret room under a bookshelf was discovered during renovations to an ancient section of the University of Virginia Medical Library. A thin volume, bound in old leather with no title or author listed on its cover, was among the few books and papers that seemed to have been purposefully hidden inside. Examined by university archivists before being sealed away once more, the contents of this volume reportedly include detailed notes on a process referred to as neural architecture preservation and electrical reanimation. The writing style and theoretical approaches corresponded with those of the articles published in the Southern Medical Journal in the late 1922, indicating a close relationship with Edwin Merritt. The last pages, which described a process for what the author called consciousness transfer, a technique in which the electrical patterns of one subject are hosted in the preserved neural tissue of another, were the most unsettling. Citing worries about research ethics and the institution's reputation, university administrators promptly classified the material and blocked access. Non-disclosure agreements had to be signed by the few people who had seen the contents. According to the official stance, the document was probably a piece of speculative fiction that had been put in the library as a practical joke and had nothing to do with real-world occurrences or scientific studies. The majority of those directly involved in the initial events had passed away by 1969. All known members of the 1911 medical faculty had died, including Samuel Preston and Dr. Thornton. If the patient at Western State Hospital was Edwin Merritt, he had been deceased for almost 40 years. The management of the institution decided to permanently seal all case-related information since they saw no need in bringing back a possibly harmful historical event. However, the narrative persisted. An old neurology professor at the university described an odd experience in the old McIntyre building around the beginning of the 1952. One night, while working late, he reported seeing a slim man dressed in antiquated clothes studying the brain specimens in the teaching collection. The stranger merely strolled away when challenged, vanishing down a hallway that the professor knew led to nothing but a storage closet. The closet was found to be empty and had its lone window locked from the inside. Over the next few decades, similar stories surfaced intermittently, always involving the older parts of the medical school and always describing a slender, intense young man who disappeared when he was approached. Officials at the university rejected these stories as academic urban legends, which are common in any long-standing institution. However, they never provided a thorough explanation for why, in spite of space constraints elsewhere on campus, some parts of the McIntyre building remained unoccupied and locked. A university electrician made a perplexing discovery in 1966 while the McIntyre building was being planned for upgrades. He discovered an electrical system that didn't show up on any architectural drawings when tracking down old wire in the basement walls. The circuits led to locations that were meant to have merely structural supports. A little compartment that had been shut off for decades was discovered when the walls were opened for examination. It contained what seemed to be the remnants of electrical equipment that was not typically employed in university operations. The equipment was defined as specially designed machinery for applying carefully regulated electrical currents to biological material by experts who were called in to inspect it. After being photographed and recorded, the room and its belongings were quickly sealed once more. Only the top levels of administration had access to the university's restricted archives, where the photos and documents vanished. According to reports, the electrician who discovered the finding signed a non-disclosure agreement and was transferred to a different campus location. The most unsettling link to the Merritt case surfaced in 1969 when the estate of a recently dead doctor who had graduated from the medical school in 1915 made an odd bequest to the university library. Rare medical texts, private documents, and a set of glass slides with tissue samples were among the items donated. According to the letter that went with it, the doctor wanted these items to be kept for their historical significance because he had acquired them from a colleague. Upon examining the slides, university archivists discovered that they contained thin slices of brain tissue that had been preserved using a unique method that had preserved cellular structure remarkably well for their age. Specimens from Procedure 7, Subject 49, with a date of December 1911 were the labels on the slides. The handwriting was similar to those found in the journals of Edwin Merritt. The content of these slides was more concerning than their provenance. The tissue samples revealed evidence of non-standard intervention, or structural alterations that could not be accounted for by natural processes or conventional preservation methods. According to a private report written for the university president, using techniques decades ahead of their time, the neural tissues seemed to have been altered in ways that showed intentional modification of cellular architecture. The report and slides were promptly locked in the restricted archives. There were no living relatives of the doctor who had donated them to inquire about their provenance. In the Merritt mystery, another thread had surfaced, only to be purposefully hidden once more. The McIntyre Building is still standing on the University of Virginia campus today, although the anatomical facilities for the medical school are no longer housed there. Unaware of the unsettling incidents that earlier took place within, contemporary pupils walk through its hallways. Except for a small number of institutional historians, the morgue's original role has been forgotten as it has been transformed into a laboratory. Every now and then, an interested scholar still requests access to the Merritt material's restricted archives. Such petitions are always turned down. The official stance of the university is still that Edwin Merritt was merely a student who left his studies for personal reasons and that no illegal anatomical study ever occurred. However, the subject is still being debated in whispers in some intellectual circles. The basic issues it brings up regarding ethics, consciousness, and the limits of medical study are still as pertinent now as they were in 1911. Specifically, what was Edwin Merritt hoping to achieve by studying at night? Did he think he could use anatomy to maintain human consciousness? And, most troubling of all, was he successful? Unanswered and possibly unanswerable, these questions reverberate over the decades. The truth is buried in forgotten graves, sealed archives, and the quiet corridors of organizations that would rather not have some parts of their past scrutinized. Only shards of what was learned in those freezing rooms under the McIntyre Building on the gloomy winter nights of 1911, a scratched-out visage in an old photograph, and mysterious cautions in private journals are left behind. An inconspicuous allusion to the Merritt case was discovered in a private collection of medical educators' correspondence in 1969 by a visiting professor from Oxford University who was studying the history of neuroanatomy in American Medical School. After his curiosity was aroused, he asked to view the university's records, but was, predictably, turned away. Unfazed, he started gathering anecdotal stories from retired professors who had heard tidbits of the tale from scholars who had been around for centuries. These accounts revealed a troubling trend. Since the 1910 seconds, medical programs in the eastern United States had at least one outstanding student with an uncommon interest in neuroanatomy and preservation methods every 10 years or so. These students had questions concerning electrical stimulation of neural tissue that went beyond the scope of the course material. After being questioned about unapproved laboratory access or missing specimens, these students frequently disappeared suddenly before finishing their studies. Although Edwin Merritt could not be directly connected to any of these cases, the pattern itself raised the unsettling possibility that Merritt's research had not been lost, but had instead been carried on by others who had come across his ideas or techniques. If accurate, it begged the question of how this kind of knowledge had been passed down over the years and across institutional lines. The Oxford professor purposefully presented his work as a study of scholarly influences rather than an examination of ethical transgressions when compiling his findings into a monograph titled Patterns of Inquiry. Theoretical Continuities in Neurological Research, 1910 to 1960. The paper was sent to a number of academic publications, all of whom acknowledged its scholarly value but chose not to publish it. Unfazed, the professor organized a small-scale private printing of the monograph and sent copies to colleagues in America and Europe. In a private letter to the author, one editor acknowledged that certain institutional pressures had influenced the decision. The majority of recipients thought it was a fascinating but speculative piece of medical history. However, some saw its ramifications and started their own independent research. Dr. Margaret Holloway, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins University, and notably, the granddaughter of Merritt's old lab collaborator Thomas Holloway, was one of them. Growing up, Dr. Holloway had heard hazy tales of her grandfather's time in medical school and his odd missing classmate. As she studied the Oxford professor's monograph, she saw details that aligned with her family's traditions. More significantly, she understood that she might have access to things that had not been known to other researchers: her grandfather's personal belongings, which were kept in her mother's Baltimore attic. A locked box containing items her grandfather had apparently kept hidden throughout his life was found by Dr. Holloway among these materials. The items included a journal that detailed his experiences with Edwin Merritt, several letters that he exchanged with Dr. Thornton in the years after the incident, and most importantly, a small leather-bound notebook that, according to university officials, he had taken from Merritt's dormitory room before they searched it. Unlike the notebooks discovered by university authorities, this one included thorough experimental protocols in addition to theoretical reflections. The later entries, which included crude explanations of neural network preservation techniques that would not be theoretically presented until the 1950 seconds, were especially unsettling since they detailed methods that foreshadowed scientific breakthroughs that would not be accomplished for decades. Given the historical and moral ramifications of these materials, Dr. Holloway had to make a tough choice. She appreciated the free flow of knowledge because she was a scientist. The tactics Merritt had reportedly used severely upset her as an ethicist. The Oxford professor and two medical historians who had previously studied the Merritt case were among the few peers she chose to share the papers with after giving it some thought. Edwin Merritt, working alone in 1911 with few resources, apparently invented theoretical approaches to neuronal preservation that foreshadowed current neuroscience by decades. According to their combined analysis, which led to a startling result, there was no explanation for how he had come to these realizations. The question of what useful outcomes, if any, he had attained prior to his absence was equally concerning. The team made the decision to present their findings to the University of Virginia in the hopes that time would have changed the school's position. They formally requested access to the sealed archives in 1969, promising to publish the materials they found in return. The university's reaction was prompt and clear. In addition to denying access, the university faced legal repercussions if any publications were made that connected it to unethical historical practices. The researchers grudgingly consented to withhold publication in the face of this institutional opposition. At Johns Hopkins, Dr. Holloway deposited her grandfather's belongings in a safe university archive, instructing them to be kept secret for 50 years following her passing. With his studies essentially prohibited, the Oxford professor went back to England. Fragments of the Merritt case continued to surface from unexpected places, but it once again slipped from scholarly conversation. A former nurse who had been employed at Western State Hospital since the early 1932 wrote a memoir on her experiences there in 1969. An unnamed guy who was admitted in 1930 and had exceptional understanding of neuroanatomy while having severe memory loss was the subject of one chapter's description of an uncommon case. She described how this patient obsessively drew intricate diagrams of the brain's anatomy for hours, paying particular attention to the temporal lobes and hippocampus, which are regions linked to memory creation. Her account of the patient's last days was particularly fascinating. He began speaking as if he were two people, she wrote, as his health quickly worsened. Sometimes he would identify himself as the student, other times as the subject. In his lucid moments, he would beg us to destroy his brain after death, insisting that it had been compromised and must not be studied. When asked to explain, he would only say that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve. The patient reportedly passed away from heart failure in 1932, in contrast to hospital records that showed burial in the institutional cemetery. The nurse's account states that a distinguished older gentleman from the university claimed his body and made arrangements for private cremation. If accurate, it implied that Dr. Thornton had gone above and above to make sure the patient's secrets were actually reduced to ashes. The story of the nurse received less attention from those outside of the local historical community. If a graduate student studying Western State Hospital's history had not noticed the facts and chronology, the connection to the Merritt case would have remained unmade. While completing his dissertation, this student reached out to Dr. Holloway at Johns Hopkins and expressed his misgivings regarding the patient's identification. By then in her 70s, Dr. Holloway concurred that the coincidence was remarkable. There were serious concerns about what had happened during those years of absence and what ailment had led Edwin Merritt to seek Dr. Thornton in particular. If the Western State patient had been him, he had been isolated for 18 years. Dr. Holloway attempted to solve the Merritt mystery one last time in 1969. In an attempt to learn more about the enigmatic patient from 1930-32, she used her professional connections to obtain access to Western State Hospital's archival patient records. What she discovered only made the mystery more complex. The admission test revealed that the patient was badly emaciated and confused when hunters discovered him wandering in the ragged mountains. His scalp had multiple healed surgical scars that were partially covered by hair, indicating multiple cranial procedures, according to a physical examination. The neurological results were even more concerning. The patient had islands of extraordinary cognitive function, and what the examining physician called compartmentalized amnesia. The patient's contradictory identification was the most perplexing element of the case. During his 2-year stay, hospital records showed that he alternately called himself Edwin, Thomas, and most often, 49. Staff blamed this on his mental confusion, but Dr. Holloway, who had read these accounts and knew about the Merritt case, saw a more troubling possibility: that the patient might have been experiencing some sort of merged consciousness, in line with Merritt's theoretical writings about neural grafting and consciousness transfer. If this theory was true, it led to the horrifying conclusion that Merritt had somehow tried to fuse his own neural patterns with those preserved from patient 49, resulting in a fractured consciousness that only started to fall apart years later. Even in 1969, such a conclusion defied accepted science, yet it was consistent with the patchwork of information that had been gathered over decades. In accordance with her contract with the University of Virginia, Dr. Holloway recorded her findings, but never published them. Her study materials were added to her grandfather's relics in the Johns Hopkins sealed collection, their mysteries kept safe for future generations to examine. An unexpected turn of events led to the Merritt case's conclusion. A sealed chamber beneath the original morgue floor, accessible only through a short corridor buried behind what had looked to be a solid wall, was found by construction workers in 1969 when renovating the old McIntyre building. This discovery had escaped prior searchers. After learning of the discovery, university authorities ordered the area to be secured and conducted a private investigation. Although their findings have never been formally revealed, word quickly got out among the school community. Maintenance personnel who were on site during the examination reported that the secret room held preserved anatomical specimens and specially designed electrical equipment, some of which was still operational after decades of disuse. The notebooks that were purportedly discovered within the room were the most unsettling. They contained comprehensive accounts of experiments carried out between December 1911 and January 1912 that documented efforts to preserve and electrically activate human neural tissue. The last entries purportedly detailed a process in which neuronal patterns were transferred from one preserved brain to another, and subsequent electrical activity observations were interpreted as a successful partial consciousness transfer. Officials from the university moved quickly to keep the situation under control. Concrete was used to encapsulate the chamber, and the building drawings were adjusted to depict the space as having a strong foundation. Employees who participated in the discovery process had to sign non-disclosure contracts. Only senior administration is aware of the specimens and documents' current location, which was taken during the night. Without hesitation, the stated justification for the building delay structural issues need more reinforcement was accepted. After the restorations were finished, the historic McIntyre building resumed its institutional life, its darkest secret once more hidden under administrative stillness and concrete layers. The University of Virginia is now one of the most prominent medical schools in the country. Its neuroscience program stands out in particular for being at the forefront of neural network dynamics and brain mapping research. Few professors or students are aware that they have an intellectual ancestor who was a bright, troubled young man whose unapproved experiments in 1911 might have predicted the future of their subject. There is no mention of Edwin Merritt in university histories or publications. Patient 49 is still identified by an anonymous number in hospital records that have been kept for a long time. Only his contributions to genuine anatomical teaching are what people remember about Dr. William Thornton. No one has ever heard of Samuel Preston, the watchful morgue worker who initially discovered the unsettling activity. However, the Merritt case's issues still have relevance in modern medical ethics. How can we strike a compromise between the inviolability of human dignity and the quest for knowledge? What limits should even the brightest minds be subject to? At what point does scientific curiosity turn into a risky fixation? The McIntyre Building, whose construction combines Jeffersonian history with contemporary efficiency, is still standing on the university campus. Few observe that the basement floor design is somewhat different from the original plans, with one area inexplicably thicker than what would be required for structural integrity. Even fewer hear the maintenance workers' whispered tales of mysterious electrical disruptions in the old building, automated equipment, and the sound of glass instruments being set up in rooms that ought to be empty. The most frequent are the stories of a slim young man in old clothes, momentarily seen in mirrors or on mirrored surfaces, hunched over an unidentified piece of art. When security shows up, there is never anyone there, only locked cabinets, vacant rooms, and maybe, if you listen closely, the faint sound of someone writing frantically in a leather-bound journal about an experiment that never really happened. According to university administrators, the secret room beneath the floor of the McIntyre Building never existed. Official records reveal nothing extraordinary found during the 1969 repairs, just routine structural reinforcing of an aging structure, and the specimens, apparatus, and journals purportedly found within it are dismissed as campus legend. With some of the most state-of-the-art medical facilities in the country, the University of Virginia continues to develop top-notch doctors. The chamber where Edwin Merritt carried out his covert research is now very different from the anatomy lab. Even now, though, some students complain that some parts of the old structure feel unusually heavy, especially in late December when the days get shorter and the nights seem to go on forever. Because of drafty ancient architecture and the inherent anxiety that comes with medical training, staff members reject such sensations as imagination. Sometimes, however, when the building is almost deserted and the corridors are still, a lone figure is seen making a deliberate move toward the basement stairs. Those who have witnessed this figure portray a ferocious young man wearing antiquated attire and toting what looks to be a medical bag. He doesn't return pleasantries, doesn't answer questions, and just disappears when someone follows him. Like some information that, once acquired, can never be fully lost. Edwin Merritt's initial enrollment and subsequent withdrawal are the only records of him in the University of Virginia's official archives. His outstanding academic record, his unapproved experiments, and his unsettling beliefs regarding consciousness transfer and neural preservation have all been erased from institutional memory. Patient 49 is still just a number. There is no record of his peculiar neurological condition or eventual demise in any easily available documents. However, the reverberations of their intersection have persisted over the years, a silent cautionary tale about knowledge sought without moral restraint, genius unbridled by humanity, and puzzles that might best be left unanswered. Once crossed, some boundaries change not just the traveler, but also the land, leaving both permanently altered in ways that institutional quiet cannot completely remove. It may never be completely known what actually transpired in the McIntyre Building's anatomy lab on those gloomy winter evenings in 1911. It might be best that way. In his parting caution, Dr. Thornton stated, "Some knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned."